Don't be that girl.
Hi everyone. It's been a bit of a crazy week last week, but before I start off, I just wanted to give a shout out to Shawn in Windsor, Ontario. That's right near Detroit, just right across the border, and he contacted me wondering if there were any MRAs in his area, and he does get to Detroit a fair bit too, so anyone from there might want to contact him. I'm going to leave his email in the low bar. And I said something about he's got some camera equipment, Steadicam, and he's left me a link to a couple of YouTube videos that sort of give a sample of what that kind of camera is capable of. And he wants to know if anybody there in the area wants to get together, form a group, do some projects, anything like that. So anyone in the Windsor, Ontario area or the Detroit area can contact him, and I will leave his info in the low bar. Alright, moving on. Okay, now, I'm sure you're all aware of Men's Rights Edmonton's recent poster campaign. If you aren't aware, you should be. That got a whole bunch of mainstream media coverage, including national coverage, and in Canada, and talk radio shows, all kinds of stuff like that. There were tons and tons of media interview requests that poured in, and we tried to deal with them as we could. I ended up doing appearances on Global TV and CTV and CBC, so I might leave links to those stories in the low bar for people who haven't seen it. And the first 3 people who randomly recognized me off from the news stories about it, just randomly recognized me at work or on the street, were all very, very supportive of what we're doing. So that's kind of nice. But the initial media response was just kind of a frothy with outrage turd that hit the fan. And I think that had to do with a women's studies professor who probably set the entire thing off, Lisak. I think she's the head of the women's studies department at the University of Alberta, and a lot of other feminist-leaning people and sort of rape advocates took some major offense to those posters that my buddies put up. So, just to fill in any people that aren't really aware of exactly what was going on, the posters were a parody/criticism of the popular Don't Be That Guy poster campaign, which originated here in Edmonton. And that campaign reminds men that it's wrong and a crime to put your penis in girls who are so drunk they've passed out or are otherwise unable to resist you. Men's Rights Edmonton's posters aimed a different message at a different type of criminal, women who make false rape accusations, admonishing women to don't be that girl. Professor Lisak claimed that our posters are rape apology. Now, I have no idea how a poster raising awareness of some situations where an accusation is made but no rape has actually occurred is a rape apology. If no rape occurred, there's really no rape to apologize or make excuses for. Other feminists, politically correct politicians, and slaves to their reptilian brains claim the campaign blames victims for their rapes. Again, in a false accusation, there's no rape, so there's no rape victim to blame, only a false accuser. The actual victim of a false accusation is the person accused, who are very often victim blamed themselves. So, Karen Smith, a sexual assault advocate/counselor, emphasized in an interview how brave a victim has to be to go to strangers and have them physically and mentally probe you about things that happen to the most intimate parts of your body, which is certainly true. What doesn't follow is her assertion that that's why people just don't lie about rape. You know, setting aside the fact that according to the Edmonton police, at least 1 to 2% of the women who engage the process clearly do lie about rape. If nothing bad had happened to the most intimate parts of your body. That is, if there was no rape, the process would be a very different experience, wouldn't it? Ms. Smith seems so obsessed with the experiences of victims, she's unable to detach the victim experience from that of a non-victim. She actually seems to believe non-victims would feel all the same things when going through the process that victims do, which kind of makes me wonder. For the malicious false accuser who does it to get revenge or to get the edge in a custody battle, the rape kit would be no different from a pap smear and pelvic exam, something most women submit to on a regular basis. In fact, given the reason behind the physical examination, I would hazard to guess a rape kit would be less brusque and more gentle than my yearly physical tends to be. For a malicious false accuser, the interviews with police would be little more than an exercise in amateur theater. Does Ms. Smith think that every actress who portrays a rape victim on Law and Order experiences the simulated grueling process of the police interview the way a real victim experiences the real thing? If they did, how would producers ever find enough actresses willing to take those roles? Other types of false accusers would experience the process in other ways. For a narcissistic accuser who makes a false complaint for attention, she'll be experiencing it the way a sufferer of Munchausen syndrome experiences unnecessary medical testing, with a sick thrill. For the false accuser who's concealing an infidelity or explaining away an STD or pregnancy, the process will be experienced as the unpleasant but necessary means to solving a bigger problem. Ms. Smith's faulty logic is what happens when you spend your entire life looking at only one problem, studying only one phenomenon from only one angle, to the exclusion of everything else, until you've reached a point where you cram every experience into one narrow model. It just doesn't happen, she insists, because the process for real victims is so grueling. Perhaps Karen Smith needs to talk to Sonar Yasa, an Edmonton cab driver falsely accused of sexual assault in 2006 by 4 female passengers who were out clubbing. Their reason for making the accusation? Yasa had told one of them to put out her cigarette, as smoking in a taxi is illegal. They then demanded to be dropped off then and there, and refused to pay the $13 cab fare. When Yasa protested, they called their friends and told them that Yasa had sexually assaulted them. The cabbie called police when a mob began to form, and the women repeated their accusations to the responding officer, who filed a report on the incident. But what do you know? Yasa had a camera installed in his cab, which had recorded the entire trip and provided incontrovertible evidence that the women had made the entire thing up. Why would a woman lie to police about rape, wonders Karen Smith? To save $13, apparently. Or because a man threw a flower at her, or because she was bored, or to divert her parents' attention from her failing grades, or because a man she'd had a one-night stand with a couple weeks before forgot her name when they ran into each other, or to convince her husband to move to a better neighborhood, or because she didn't want to pay for a cab and knew the police would drive her home, or so the police wouldn't drop her off at the psychiatric ward again, that would be Crystal Mangum, or because she didn't want to admit to her boyfriend that she'd spent the night cheating on him with 3 men, which was Hofstra. A lesbian activist in the U.S. carved Christian symbols into her own body and claimed 3 white Christian men had broken into her home, assaulted, tortured, and raped her. Irony of ironies, she staged the entire thing to draw attention to the cause of fighting homophobia and violence against women. For a woman willing to carve her own body up, to make a martyr of herself, is the grueling nature of the process of reporting really going to be a deterrent? Is it, when a different false accuser is prepared to engage this grueling process just to get a free lift home or to get out of paying $13? One of the ladies who accused Sonar Yasa was kind enough to phone police the next day to apologize for the trouble and to assure the police that none of the women were planning on going through the grueling process of pursuing sexual assault charges against Yasa. Cream on the cake. The police refused to pursue charges against the women for making a false accusation, despite Yasa's urging, despite incontrovertible proof that they were lying, and despite the fact that the evidence was all that saved him from having to go through his own grueling process. The process of defending himself, not just to the justice system, but to friends, family, neighbors, and present and future employers. And in light of Yasa's case, I'd be very interested to know how the Edmonton Police Service classifies false complaints of rape. Would Yasa's case fall into that 1 or 2% of sexual assault complaints where evidence of falsity is so obvious the police literally trip over it while looking for evidence of veracity? Or was it not even counted because the women never actually filed an official complaint of sexual assault and it was never passed on to a dedicated sex assault investigator? I find myself wondering, too, how Karen Smith, victim advocate, thinks a rape victim might feel or react if police said to her, "Well, sure, we know we raped you. We have airtight evidence on video, but we think pursuing a prosecution would send too troubling a message to victims of other crimes. So yeah, we're just going to let it drop." Because that's exactly the mentality behind Edmonton Police's refusal to press charges in Yasa's case. Edmonton City Councillor and mayoral hopeful Don Iveson called the "Don't Be That Girl" posters morally indefensible. I wish he'd explain how, because the only reason I can think of that our posters would be morally indefensible is the same reason the original ones are, that they associate the behavior of a small percentage of a group of people to the group as a whole. The only difference being that men are a much higher percentage of rape victims and women a much higher percentage of perpetrators than the original posters would indicate, while false rape accusations are a predominantly female phenomenon. So even if our posters are just as morally indefensible as the originals, at least they're accurate. The Edmonton Police Service said the posters demeaned and belittled rape victims. You know what, EPS? I've talked to a few rape victims, and if there's one person they typically hate almost as much as a rapist, it's a false rape accuser. Women who make false accusations appropriate the horrible thing that some unfortunate women experience and exploit that horrible thing to get out of paying $13. Those are the people demeaning and belittling the experiences of rape victims. And by extension, a justice system that refuses to punish women who lie about rape is demeaning and belittling the experiences of rape victims, and allowing false accusers to damage the credibility of every legitimate victim without any accountability for the harm they do. And it demeans and belittles a justice system that is supposed to protect all victims, including victims of false accusations. Pretending women never lie about rape is not only dishonest, it sends a despicable message to victims. Women never lie about rape tells victims they should always be believed on the spot, and therefore the normal investigative process is a re-victimization rather than a necessary evil. It tells them that when police ask questions they have to ask to ferret out details, detect inconsistencies, and test the veracity of the claim. It's not because some women lie and investigators are performing due diligence, but because the police are intentionally making the process more difficult than it has to be, and obviously don't want to help them. As for the real reason everyone involved lost their shit over these posters, I personally think it's just a reflection of that age-old double standard. There is no social taboo against attacking men, so it's okay to imply that without constant reminding, ordinary guys will just go around raping left, right, and center because they're too stupid to understand what consent is, or they're so sex-obsessed they'll actually be interested in sex with a woman whose physical state is that of a half-inflated sex doll, only with the bonus feature ability of being able to puke all over them. But apply the exact same reasoning and method to remind women that making a false rape accusation is a crime, and people act like you've just tossed a kitten in a blender and hit frappe. You're not allowed to even acknowledge the small percentage of women who dishonestly and callously exploit society's justifiable contempt for men who rape for revenge, an alibi, or attention. Any acknowledgement that some small percentage of women are shitty enough to lie about rape is translated as an attack on all women, especially rape victims. The very fact that some people have interpreted our posters as saying that all rape accusations are false is a silent condemnation of the originals as saying that all men would rape if you only just forgot to remind them not to every 15 minutes. As for the legitimacy of our campaign, it is a legitimate criticism of that double standard and has hopefully led to a lot more public criticism of yet another double standard, how the system treats crime depending on the sex of the victim and the sex of the perpetrator. I mean, heck, what's the problem with sacrificing a cab driver or some other guy? here and there by denying them justice and refusing to hold a false accuser accountable, or even acknowledge they exist, if there's even just the tiniest chance that it might convince more women to report their rapes. It might destroy a few men's lives, sure, but if there's any chance at all it'll help a few women, then it's all evened out. And frankly, while it may arguably be that people differ on what they think of as rape, everyone knows that the thing called rape, however defined, is a crime. But judging by the outcome of the Yasa case, even the police don't know that making a false complaint of rape is a crime. And judging by the female passenger's very generous decision to not charge the cab driver with sexual assault after video evidence exonerated him and implicated them, I guess there are plenty of women who apparently don't realize it's a crime either. So, who are the people who need educating here? Anyhow, this entire kerfuffle has got me thinking more about the Don't Be That Guy campaign, and all the reasons I believe it's not the positive message its proponents believe, not even for women. People who are familiar with me and what I do will know why Don't Be That Guy is a negative message for men. It paints all men as potential sexual predators. It smears every man with the stain of a behavior confined to a small percentage of men and women, and associates masculinity rather than narcissism and sociopathy with rape. It does nothing to address the responsibility of women for keeping themselves safe, especially when they're drinking, but instead pretends that if we just bludgeon men long enough with this particular message, women will just eventually be safe. It portrays women as toddlers who can't be trusted to drink responsibly or plan ahead, and portrays men as rapists or rapists in waiting. Like nearly every feminist spearheaded awareness campaign regarding sexual assault, it ignores the problem of sexual assaults against men, as well as those committed by women. In the kabuki play of sexual assault discourse, the only role available for a man is perpetrator, and the only role available for a woman is victim. This is really all just the same old bullshit MRAs have been talking about for I don't even know how long, despite all the efforts by feminists to scream us out of the discussion. But I also wanted to get into a few of the reasons that Don't Be That Guy is, in my opinion, a misleading, misguided, and potentially harmful message to send to women. First, it assumes that there exists some vast number of men who just don't understand consent, who don't realize that molesting a passed-out woman or that getting a woman so drunk she can't physically resist when you hold her down and fuck her is morally wrong and a crime. It also assumes there's a huge number of men who, when enthusiastically consenting women are not available to them, will go ahead and have sex with one who is borderline comatose, drooling, possibly covered in her own urine and vomit. This can only generate a fear in women that is very much misplaced. Even setting aside the question of how well men understand or don't understand consent, or whether they do or don't think sex with an incapacitated woman is rape, or a different crime, or wrong, or gross, or mean, something feminists never really seem to ask in their surveys. The concept behind the Don't Be That Guy posters depends on the assumption that there is this huge population of men who are interested enough in sex with an unconscious woman, or one who is not enjoying herself but unable to fend off his advances, that lots of them might be willing to give it a try at least once. And this is simply not the case. Researcher Dr. David Lisak of the University of Massachusetts at Boston, who has done extensive study on undetected rapists on campuses, says schools put too much faith in teachable moments and too much stock in the idea that a rapist might be a man who just made a terrible mistake or error in judgment and can learn to be a better person. According to Lisak's analysis of the self-reported rapes of college men, the one-time offender who might have learned his lesson at best represents a third of offenders, 2% of all men, and is responsible for only 10% of college rapes. Now, it might be that these guys, this 2% of men, are guys who just don't understand consent or don't know it's a crime, or who can learn a lesson and go on to be a better person after realizing they hurt someone. I say maybe, because to my knowledge, Lisak hasn't really portrayed them this way. Regardless, they are responsible for a tiny percentage of college rapes. The other 90% of college rapes are perpetrated by repeat offenders, 2/3 of offenders, just 4% of the general population of men, commit nearly all the rapes on campus. Not just that, this 4% of the men in the sample committed 28% of all the other self-reported violence, such as slapping an intimate partner, minor sexual assaults like groping, general assault, or abusing children. These are men who hurt people, who know they're hurting people, and who do it anyway. And while Lisak acknowledges these men do not typically describe what they do as rape, they seem very, very aware that their victims are not consenting. He knows this because they brag about how clever they are in circumventing a victim's ability to refuse consent. They talk about targeting the most vulnerable women and maneuvering and manipulating them in ways that make them even more immediately vulnerable, and about the measures they take afterward to discourage their victims from reporting the sex as an assault. Now, how do they convince victims not to tell? Emotionally manipulating the victim to self-blame is a common one noted by Lisak. Or maybe he convinces her he thought she wanted it, and he was just confused about her consent. Or maybe he even guilts her into not reporting by claiming to be a regular guy who just made a single terrible error in judgment, but he can learn from it and become a better person. I would find it absolutely ironic if the myth those posters are perpetuating, that lots of guys just don't realize what they're doing is hurting someone in a crime, came from accounts victims have made to rape counselors after being lied to by their rapists. The rapist lies to his victim, the victim repeats the lie as if it's true, and then all of a sudden we have people thinking rapists rape women because they just don't know any better, but with enough education they can figure it out. And then you have a feedback loop where these posters essentially confirm to a woman that the narcissistic, sociopathic piece of shit who raped her really might be what he says. Just a regular guy who made one mistake, and not a guy who's probably done it before and will again. Because hey, these posters imply that this kind of thing happens all the time. And these posters also imply that men who would rape can learn not to do it. That's the positive message sent by these posters, that the small percentage of men who rape over and over and are responsible for almost all campus rapes, that percentage is actually a large population of regular guys who make one mistake and are capable of learning from it, or capable of being educated into not making that mistake in the first place. These posters do nothing to tell women what actual rapists are like, do nothing to inform them of the cluster of behavioral and personality traits associated with the recidivist responsible for nearly all campus rapes: narcissism, entitlement, superficial general aggression and violence. These posters, in fact, imply to women that the man who raped them might not be the repeat offender responsible for 90% of rapes, and that maybe he hasn't done it before, and maybe he won't do it again. And that's a dangerous message in a culture where, according to many, only 10% of rape victims report what happened to them. Because honestly, if I'd been raped and my rapist had been able to convince me that it was all just a big misunderstanding and that he could learn from it and wouldn't do it again, and I'd heard tons of public rhetoric implying, well, yeah, that kind of thing happens all the time, I might not be willing to put myself through the grueling process of reporting just for my own sake, or to destroy a regular guy's life over one error. But if I knew that 90% of the time he's done it before and will do it again to someone else, you can be damn sure I'd be thinking about all his past and future victims and schlepping myself down to the police station to report. The stated target of these posters, the rapists themselves, well, that 4% of men responsible for almost all rapes, who are recidivist predators and perpetrate a hugely disproportionate percentage of all other violence, does anyone think a poster campaign like this is going to change their behavior? Elton Yarbrough, a student at Texas A&M who was linked to 5 rapes before he was finally put in prison, still insists he never broke the law, despite describing in detail the very acts that got him convicted of rape. One of the most disturbing things about this case is that he allegedly did it again to another woman after he was charged with rape. If a criminal conviction isn't enough to convince a rapist that having sex with a woman while she's drunk and unconscious, something he did 4 times to 4 women, and allegedly a 5th time after he'd been charged, if a rape conviction isn't enough to convince him what he did was a crime, what good does anyone think posters telling rapists it's a crime are going to do. The Don't Be That Guy campaign does nothing to prevent rape. All it does is perpetuate a dangerous myth about rapists and point an accusing finger at the 94% of men, the only ones this message will have any effect on, who don't rape women. You want to decrease rape? Get the recidivist rapists out of the population. Best way to do that with a poster campaign? Target it at women and educate them. The message should be, he's probably lying to you. 90% of rapes are committed by a man who's done it before and will do it again. Speak up. Don't Be That Guy needs to go, because 94% of guys aren't that guy, and the few who are that guy are sociopathic pieces of shit who don't give a fuck about hurting others and who like being that way. The effect campaigns like this have on public sentiment about men and men's feelings about themselves is that rape is just something men do, rather than something sociopaths do. That's just one of the many lies feminists tell to convince everyone men are the problem. And those lies sure seem to convince a lot of people, including a lot of men, that what's wrong with society has a male face. I have no doubt these dishonest posters will stay up, no matter how bigoted and potentially harmful they are, because what's one more campaign pinning yet another human evil on masculinity, even if it might be inadvertently harming women as well as men? It's just a drop in the bucket. People to sacrifice on the altar of a doctrine. Anyhow, that's hopefully all I'll have to say about the posters for a little while. I feel like I've been talking about them for days on end. Oh wait, except for on the Tom Leykis show, hopefully tomorrow evening, 3 p.m. Pacific time. So, anyone who wants to tune into that, I would invite you to do so. And we're going to try and get Raslo and Eric Duckman on the show as well. So, hopefully I will be talking with the guy who progressives in the US call that misogynist on the radio. Should be a lot of fun. Anyhow, don't forget, if you're in the Windsor area, contact Shawn. Contact info's down below, and see if you guys can't get together and get something going. So, talk to you guys later.